70 years ago, something special started. Formula One. Man and machine in perfect unison. Pushing each other to their limits. Supported by teams, aiming for that top step.
The name of the game is winning.
Seeking perfection. The road hasn't always been smooth. We've marveled at great moments. Had smiles brought to our faces. Cried with our heroes. Witnessed incredible bravery and terrible sadness. Moments never to be forgotten. For 70 years, this has been their Everest. This is what makes them special. This is the story of Formula One.
Way back in mid-1956 or so, I was very keen to have a go at racing, but my parents were very much against it. And I used to go along with a friend of mine, Ian Scott Watson, acting as his mechanic, pit crew, pit signaller and everything.
How good a mechanic were you?
Oh, not good at all, I shouldn't think. Mind you, he never broke down, but that was nothing to do with me. But one day he, when we were way up in Crimmin, Aberdeenshire, when we thought my parents would never hear anything about it or anything, I had to go in a racing car. And his car, well, it wasn't a racing car, it was just a saloon car, and thoroughly enjoyed it. And from then on, he became the mechanic and I became the driver.
Many of us, I think, did realise there was a tremendous talent there. I had a lot of difficulty in persuading him to understand that he did have this talent.
He was a great friend and a man of incredible integrity. And if you were a friend, you really were a friend.
To be honest, it's difficult for me to, if you know what I mean, worship anything that happened in my era. Same with drivers. You know, Michael Schumacher, 7 times world champion, for me, he was a young bloke. Jim Clark, on the other hand, is God.
He was a great man to work with because of his outstanding ability of just being a natural driver.
It's a kind of modern miracle, Jim, really, because he sort of cut his teeth on a Porsche 356, which isn't exactly a very well-handling car. And he had a glorious following of people that believed in him, and he got results.
Clearly, Jimmy was an extraordinary man. He was genuinely loved by the team and the fans and the media, and Jimmy was the closest friend that Dad ever had.
You knew if the car was put together properly and everything was right, he was going to win with the car. He was a winner.
The Duke of Kent joined thousands of fans at entry for the 15th British Grand Prix. Now hold on to your hats. "75 laps and 27 of the fastest cars in the world lapping them up. Jim Clark took the lead right from the word go. John Surtees drove his Lola into a very creditable second place, for there wasn't a hope of catching Clark. The young Scottish farmer notched the fastest lap and went on to win at over 92. Jim Clark and his Lotus, the fastest combination on the track today.
My earliest recollections of Jim Clark was standing on the bank at Copse Corner at Silverstone and Paddock Hill Bend at Brands Hatch with my uncle, who took me to the races, cheering him on because he wanted Jim Clark to win. But just the sheer elegance and speed with which he came through those 2 particular corners, drifting the car, an economy of driving style, he was one of the greatest of all times, there's no doubt about it, and I wish I had had the chance to meet him.
Fasten your safety belts, we're going after him. Jim Clark had been hoping for rain to cool the engine of his Works Lotus, number 18. His prayers were answered, and he maintained his lead throughout. 273 miles at an average of over 125, a course record for 1.5-litre cars, and his third successive Grand Prix win, giving him a comfortable lead for the World Championship.
What did he win, Jimmy Clark? 25 Grand Prix, I think, for Lotus. And he was, at the time, the most winning driver. Won 2 World Championships, 1963 and 65.
I was in Formula 3 when he was in Formula 1, and Formula 2 I was racing with him. And he was just the best driver in the world for me.
Jim Clark describes Germany's Nürburgring, scene of the recent Grand Prix, as the classic circuit, unequalled anywhere in the world. But Jim's always suffered from a German jinx. He never won at Nürburgring until now. This tremendous win in his Lotus Climax, number 1, is a twofold triumph. He's beaten the jinx and clinched the world title. Jim has won every world title race he's entered this year, 6 of them in fact. He's the first Briton ever to win the Drivers' Championship more than once. Well done, Jim. Well done, Lotus Climax, the invincible team of world motor racing.
From the point of view of achievement and success, you know, he was one of those drivers who was quick and would get the car home. You know, there's lots of drivers who are quick that don't finish, and vice versa. But Jimmy really was, in the same way my dad was the perfect engineer for motorsport, Jimmy was the perfect driver for motorsport. So you put those two things together, and that's exceptional.
Jimmy Clark won all his Grand Prix in Lotus cars. And I believe the way he communicated with Chapman and with Chapman's people produced cars that just got better and better. They all spoke the same language, they all listened to each other, they all thought about it, and then they did the right thing at the right time, and hence produced cars that handled well, they had good engines, had good gearbox, got the tires working properly. They got the result.
Right from the start of practice, driver Jim Clark and his Ford-powered Lotus blister the track with smooth, fast laps that have made him champion driver of the world. Rookie drivers must wear 3 stripes on the back of their cars, so veteran drivers can give them a wide berth. However, of the 14 newcomers to Indianapolis this year, Mario Andretti is one of the most promising.
The great thing about Indy, you see each other for a few weeks on and off, and I tried really hard to befriend him because the obvious, you know, I want him to notice me to some degree, but also get into Colin, if you will. As a young lad, I was just, you know, I felt so giddy about having the opportunity, you know, to be on the same track with someone like that.
Jim Clark crosses the finish line to win the 500 with a comfortable lead of more than 2 minutes. It is the culmination of 3 years of effort by car builder Colin Chapman, and he dances down the pits like a ballet artist as Clark drives the triumphant road to victory lane. Jim Clark, first European to win at Indianapolis since 1916, set a new record of 150.686 miles per hour in the safest 500 ever, and one of the most historic.
He was jet set. He was, you know, a traveler, and he was a superstar.
Johannesburg, where 23 of the world's leading drivers got away to a brisk start in the South African Grand Prix. Number 16, Jackie Stewart, took the lead in the first lap as the Formula One cars tore down the straight at over 170 miles an hour. Jim Clark, number 4, in a Lotus Ford, was quick to snatch the lead in the second lap and kept ahead all the way. His speed was a record average, and he set up a track record too, as Jim Clark romps home to his 25th Grand Prix win.
He gave you trouble?
Well, it was very warm indeed, and my feet, I don't know if I can stand yet until I get out of the car.
Your feet are very warm,
blistered, yeah.
Doesn't this give you more Grand Prix wins than anybody else has done in the world yet?
That's true.
Congratulations, Jim. This is an absolutely splendid effort.
Okay, thank you very much.
Circuits in those days were totally different to today, and Hockenheim just had fir trees all around it, and then there was a road up the middle of the fir trees, so if anything happened, you're almost destined to hit a fir tree, weren't you?
I don't really like talking about it much, because April the 7th comes up, it's a bad day. He wasn't his bouncy self, and he was always around the car. He actually got on his hands and knees with the screwdriver, arms strong, shoulders always tick, tick, did his own front and rear. He said, that's leave them alone, don't touch them, or that's how we're going to race the car, David, okay? He didn't come round, oh, okay, of course, no radios in those days. And then it was a Porsche course car came up, stopped in the pit and said, Jim Clark, Jim Clark. Yeah, I said, what's happened? Get in the car. Okay. Then I saw an ambulance on the side, sort of half on the grass, half on the tarmac. And then I saw something which I don't like to remember much. I saw a bit of a monocoque with a fuel tank hanging out the back, with no engine or gearbox in the car. Just nothing, nothing. And you could see a path way through, and this is where the engine and gearbox had gone through. After hitting the tree, which he had hit, Graham took control. He was absolutely fantastic. Oh, what a man. He took control of the whole situation. And he said, get the truck out of the paddock, get it round. And we got out there and we loaded all what was left, the bits and pieces of it in. Then Graham had to go to Mannheim to identify the body.
The day Jim Clark died, I was on a riverbank with my dad in Lincolnshire, and we heard it over the radio, the car radio, that he'd died. And those are the moments that stick with you in life, aren't they?
I remember I was on my way to the Phoenix race in the morning when he was killed at Hockenheim, when I heard the news on the radio. Again, devastating, you know, just these are some of the things that you just don't understand, you know. If there is a God, why is he taking the good people away from us, you know?
If somebody as great as Jim Clark can lose his life in a racing car, and a driver who was not known to have accidents or make errors of judgment or whatever, that really went through me like a piece of, you know, tungsten. It's a dangerous profession. And that was probably one of the most salient moments of that part of my life. That really, really resonated. And it probably has never left me. In fact, the way I'm describing it to you, it probably hasn't.
As an amateur, it put me off driving immediately to hear that greatest of great drivers had been killed. And I know that it still to this day will reduce Jackie Stewart to tears, the thought that Jimmy's gone.
I was doing a Grand Prix Drivers Association track inspection at Jarama, where the Spanish Grand Prix was going to be held that year. And I was on my own with a notepad and a pen, walking around the circuit. I remember exactly where I was on the circuit when a man arrived in an Alfa Romeo Giulietta or something, and he said, Jim Clark dead. That was all he could say. So I got him to drive me back to the control tower to be confirmed, I got into a car as quickly as I could because Helen had just flown into Geneva, and we stopped the car at a wee restaurant so that I could phone Helen, and I called her, and we never spoke. Just like that. Even now. Yeah. Silly.
I used the secretary of my cousin, and there was the running gag that whenever I left for a race, I said, when Ferrari calls, please tell me, as a joke. And I came home from Monte Carlo on Monday, and the girl said the Ferrari called. Jumped in the car, drove all the way down.
He was very, very, very happy to have the possibility to come, of course, to Ferrari. You have to consider that at that time, our age was very similar. He was a young driver at the beginning of the career. I was a young team manager at the beginning of my career. So we have a very sympathetic approach. I asked him, what car you drive? A Ford Capri. I said, don't come with the Ford Capri to Maranello. So we stop 1 kilometer before the factory. I come to pick you up with the Fiat car, and you went.
The car simply did not work. Yeah? So, and I stopped, and then the old man was there, and I got out of the car, and I didn't speak Italian at the time. And Piero, his son, had to translate what I said. So and I said, the car is terrible. It is a bad car and it doesn't work. And then Piero said, I can't tell this to my father. I said, you have to, because it's terrible. And then he told him, and then he didn't like it because the Ferrari was something special to him, which was to everybody anyway. And then he said right away, what do we have to do to make the car quicker? I don't know, I'm not an engineer, but you have to get rid of the understeer. If you get rid of the understeer, how much quicker can you go? I said, 3/10, easy. Yeah, so I said, okay. If you don't do 3/10 quicker, then you're gonna have a problem with me. I think a week later, we tested again, that I was 5/10 quicker. So.
But you look at me, and I will have my flag up, down. No, like in Germany, that they do like that, and then, no, what? Capito tutto bene?
We always ask my dad, what was your first win in F1? I still remember since I was a kid, he told me it was in Spain, like Madrid, in Jarama. I still have this image in my head of Luca going on the start and finish line and just jumping on track, like this you couldn't do today. And I saw this image a lot of times on TV, and he told me about his first win, and I think it was great. Yeah.
The first race win is for every driver the most important one, because you've never done it. It was interesting. Fittipaldi called me that evening in the hotel, which I had very little to do with Fittipaldi. And he said, you know, I tell you what, because he was the master and I was the young guy, the first one is the most difficult one, the next ones come easy. I said, what does he mean? Then when you look back what he had to do for this first win, he was right.
The car was a super competitive car, very innovative with the transversal gearbox, and last but not least, a very good team of mechanics.
Wonderful pit stop. That must have frightened you, the thought of coming into the pits when you were leading.
Yes, it's right, but I'm really happy about our mechanics because they are very well trained. As you know, they did a lot of sport car racing, so they did a very good job.
We won in Monza, in front of our public.
32-2 abbiamo. Incredible. What for you ride the pitch? Don't even know what time I do.
But most of all, we won after 12 years the World Championship title with Niki in the same race in front of our public. And for me, this was one, still now, the best day of my life. And I went immediately to call Enzo. And for the first time, he said to me, thank you for what you have done.
He's so proud of himself. Said if he gets publicity, he even tells the important Ferrari secrets to everyone.
I tell you, instead they talk about cars, about time, why don't we talk about girls now?
Yes, I prefer.
We started the 76 season easy, right in front and winning races. then the Nürburgring accident happened. There was a new magnesium part on the top of the engine, and this broke. So my right rear wheel moved, the car turned right and crashed. Mazzario saved my life because they were all jumping around. You could see it in television. I didn't know because I had no idea what's happening. He said the fire, I didn't mind because I was dressed anyway, fireproof, but I couldn't open the seatbelt. Then thank God he did, and then he pulled me out. And I said, listen, how can you pull me out in the fire, getting me through the dashboard? I'm for sure 65 kilos heavy. And he said, you were light as a feather. It was unbelievable. It was a nice say, and he had all the strength to get me out. Otherwise, I would not be here.
I said, right, lay down on the track. I kneeled down and put his head on my lap. So I was sort of looking down on him like this. And he said to me, he said, what's my face look like? I said, don't worry, you're okay, you're fine, you've been burned, but you're okay. In fact, his scalp was in some places charred black.
And then I really said to myself, no, I'm not going to die, because this is annoying. And it was good, actually, because the only thing you could get out of this mess was with your brain. Because the body you couldn't do anything. The body was more or less dead, but the brain was still working. And the brain convinced myself, stay awake, don't sleep, because you're going to die, listen to whatever is happening and keep going.
Daniele Audetto, the team manager for Ferrari, come and say, Emerson, I have a call for you. And we all expecting Nick to survive, and was commendatore, asking me to drive. At that time, at that point, that's how tough is Formula One. And I say, commendatore, scusa, parliamo prossima settimana. We talk next week. But I was shocked when he called me.
The burns to him were very unpleasant. But Nicky, being the pragmatist, said, I'm not going to have plastic surgery. I'm the same man I was before the burns. If you don't like how I look, then you're not a true friend.
The cars were physical. It was hot. The stories you hear of him taking off his balaclava, including sort of blood and flesh, and to go back in the car and drive the car at a competitive speed, despite those injuries a few weeks before, was just inconceivable to me, actually.
Nicky was a fantastic example to anybody in life. When your mind wants to do and recover, you can do much more than you expect. And that was incredible. His coming back to Monza with all the pressure from the Italian press, being in Italy, Ferrari driver.
I said to my team, I don't want to know any times of anybody else. I don't even want to see my times, which is normal racing, and let me drive. And got out and drove, like a Sunday drive. Quicker and quicker, like the car, got the understeer, and no pressure from the race. It was Saturday. Friday I missed. And then I got out of the car, felt good, looked at the time, quickest Ferrari. Ooh, I said, interesting, Mr. Reutemann, Regazzoni, you were not in the hospital.
It is the most courageous act of bravery I've seen from any sports person, certainly in my time. Remarkable.
Have you a chance of beating Nicky if you were to win this one?
Well, I reckon so. We need our 9 points from Spain rather badly to stand a good chance of beating Nicky, but you never know what happens in these things. It's a long championship. I've just got to keep going, plugging away, getting the best results I can, and maybe things will fall into place later in the year.
It has to be said, Lauda's accident at the Nürburgring in August, had that not happened, frankly, Lauda would have walked it to the World Championship, even though James was very competitive with him and won races. The way it all ended in Japan, Lauda withdrew very early in the race because he said that the conditions were simply unacceptable. So he came in and got out of the car, and Mauro Foghieri suggested inventing a problem with the car, so, allowing him to save face, and of course Lauda being Lauda, he wouldn't have it. I thought that was one of the bravest things he ever did. And James, of course, went on to finish third in the race, which was, and get the points he needed to take the championship by 1 point.
I have to honestly say, if you're objective, I didn't lose the race like everybody thinks in Japan. I lost the race because I had a huge accident and didn't race for 3 or 4 races. This is the main reason. But nevertheless, I was happy that he won it. I delivered what they expected me to deliver, so I didn't feel good or bad. And then they told Gworgy, my mechanic, that he's not allowed to work on the car. And we came to Watkins Glen. The guy was outside the garage crying. I said, Gworgy, what's happening? They just told me, no, I'm not allowed to work on your car. So I went to Odette and said, are you crazy? I want my chief mechanic to work on the car. So then I brought him back for 1 race, but then they said the next race he won't be there. So fine, then I won't be there. Very simple. Championship is secured. So all these things happened, which really annoyed me, and therefore it was, for me at the time, an easy decision to leave. But to look backwards, it was the wrong decision to leave, because I would have stayed with Ferrari. I could have won more championships.
When Niki Lauda was driving for us, through a friend of mine, that he was the chief pilot for British Caledonian, he arranged to go to Lockheed and go on the simulator. And Niki was obviously into his flying, so I took Niki along, and I remember we were driving back to Long Beach, and Niki said, I'm going to buy one. We then move on to Montreal. Niki jumps out of the car. Where's Bernie? I said, he's down in the paddock in the motorhome. He said, need to go and see him. And so I walked down with Niki, and Niki told me, he said, that's it, I'm finished.
I knew that I cannot race forever, so I thought it is the right time to retire. No regrets, nothing. Started the other business for 2 years. And then suddenly Ron called me all the time. What are you doing? How's life? You know, always in the right moments. And then he called me once again. And then I said, yeah, maybe let's do a test.
He said, I don't know how I feel about it anymore. And I said, yeah, but you know, I know all about that, Niki, but I can tell you you're a racer. You know, no one gets into a racing car to make money. No one gets into a racing car with any intention other than to win. And I don't think you've done enough winning.
I went to Donington only to see what my motivations are. Are they good for motor racing? Are there any bad feelings when I get back into these cars? Or is everything for it? And as there has been everything for it, and I really like to drive again, I took the decision. Each page, no?
Every page.
It started again. And then I came back in '82.
Niki was, I was a big fan. I saw him, you know, driving. I mean, he was one of my idols when I was younger.
He used to say, this little Frenchman, he's just so quick, you know. He can benefit from my experience setting up the car and all of that, but there's no way I can benefit from his quickness, you know. But I am not going to give up. I'm going to try even harder.
Portuguese Grand Prix 1984 was memorable, to say the least. We went to the Grand Prix knowing that we'd won both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship, but what hadn't been decided of which of our drivers was going to win the Drivers' Championship.
Prost out-qualified Lauda, and Lauda didn't have a brilliant start, dropped down the field quite a bit, and stayed out of trouble, picked off people one at a time, gradually worked his way back up towards the front. He got up to 3rd place, which wasn't going to be good enough. And then I think it was Nigel Mansell dropped out in the last laps, which elevated him to 2nd, which was just enough to win the championship by half a point.
What do you have to say to Alain Prost at this moment, your teammate and compatriot all year long?
He was the toughest guy to beat, as far as I know. The toughest guy, so therefore this championship is the most important one for me.
What are you going to do to celebrate tonight, Niki?
First, I need a rest.
Niki has been one of the best friends of my life. Always a super friend for me. And for me, to be honest, I miss him a lot.
Niki
contrary to Warhol's 15 minutes of fame, was somebody that aimed to be relevant his whole life. And he achieved that. Jackie Stewart and Jochen Rindt were, well, for one thing, first off, they were firm friends.
There was a definite human relationship existing in those days that I don't think seems to exist today. We were friends right from the beginning, and Nina and Helen are best friends to this very day. Was never going to win the Mr. World contest.
At school, people were laughing at him about his bent nose, but later on, when he was a Formula One star, it all put together, and he was a character. For an Austrian, you know, motor racing or Formula One racing was like going with a space shuttle, so it was so far away from us.
I think Helmut kind of probably followed Jochen a little bit, but they went to the Nürburgring in '61 to see Wolfgang von Trips.
We arrived in the middle of the night at the circuit, and in the morning we wake up, and then at that time we could hear after 2 or 3 laps if it is a Ferrari, a Ford or BM or whatever. Jochen woke up, he said, "That's what I'm going to do."
I saw him in some races, Formula Junior races, when he raced my father. He was pretty wild in those days, and my father beat him in every race because he was out in the sort of 3rd lap or something.
All his friends, we were really worried in his early days. He was really wild, and with material which was not competitive, he tried his best. But his whole life was always on the limit or over the limit.
Lots of people agree with me. He probably was the most talented. He was super talented. And as a friend, he was just a good friend.
Jochen had lots of really good friends like Piers and Jackie, but also obviously there was Nina.
We were 21 years old. I was 20, he was 21. We were kids, really. And he sort of looked at my father and said, "Could I invite her out tonight?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah." And he told me, "Are you mad? You can't marry a racing driver. You know what they do. They maybe work a few hours a week, and the rest of the time, you know what they do? They sit in bars and look at other women. You want to be married like that?"
But Jochen was different. He wasn't like that.
Of course he was.
They were the kind of the posh and becks in some ways. You know, they were both smartly dressed, and Jochen used to wear this big fur coat and very, very elegant. And Nina was just a stunning lady. So, good couple.
In the early stages of the Monaco Grand Prix, Jackie Stewart held the lead for the first 27 laps. It was one of the most thrilling races ever seen on this twisting circuit. Later, Jack Brabham, number 5, took over, but Jochen Rindt of Austria was closing right up in a Lotus. Unlucky Brabham lost the lead on the very last bend when his brakes locked. Rindt flashed through to victory, but Brabham finished 2nd to regain the lead in the World Championship.
Jack was unlucky at Monaco. I think Jack just, I would imagine he was spending too long looking for Jochen in his mirrors. Was over to the right a bit to stop him coming down the inside, and in the end just locked up.
I just couldn't quite get stopped for the last corner and just nudged the fence. But a flag marshal jumped over the fence to push the car back. And when he pushed it, he lost his balance and fell across the nose of the car with his hands over either side. And I was, what do? I couldn't very well drive over. I'd have killed him if I'd started off again.
Jackie Stewart and Jochen Rindt, they had some wonderful races together. In my mind, I will always think of Jackie as the greater and Jochen as the quicker.
I thought a lot of Rindt. He was an excellent driver, really, and a good driver that you could drive wheel to wheel with without any trouble.
Among top drivers lined up for the RAC British Grand Prix, John Miles in the Lotus Ford. Denny Hulme in the McLaren. world champion Jackie Stewart in one of the new March races. Austria's brilliant Jochen Rindt in a Lotus Ford. And former world champion Jack Brabham in a Brabham Ford. Veteran driver Brabham led at the start, but he was soon overtaken by Jackie Ickx in a Ferrari. Now Rindt slipped into the lead and Brabham chased him for more than 70 laps. There was seldom more than a narrow gap separating the two. Ten laps from the end, Brabham took the lead again. But within seconds of the finishing line, his petrol gave out due to a leak. Once again, Rindt had snatched victory from the unfortunate Australian. There was more drama when Rindt was disqualified on suspicion of using the wrong type of aerofoil. A trying moment for him, but after inspection, the disqualification was lifted, putting him way ahead in the World Championship Drivers' table.
Was lucky to win when Jack's car sort of stuttered and ran out of fuel, but that was because Nick Guzet had left the thing on full rich when they warmed it up and forgotten to set it back to normal.
The start of the German Grand Prix on the Hockenheim circuit. Jack Brabham, nearest challenger to Jochen Rindt in the World Championship, was left behind. The race developed into a tremendous battle between Belgian Jackie Ickx in a Ferrari number 10 and Rindt showing number 2 on a Lotus. Battling wheel to wheel for nearly an hour and 3/4 in this 210-mile race, their cars were seldom more than a few feet apart. They swapped the lead several times. Both drivers broke the lap record. In the end, Rindt was the winner of this cliffhanger, but only by 7/10 of a second. The Austrian ace now has a commanding lead of 20 points in the championship, with 9 of the 13 point-scoring races already run.
Colin Chapman was a fantastic person in a way, but a designer on his own, which was the best at the time, I have to say. And the best means he always produced the best cars, quickest cars, and took chances with the cars to go quick. And it's logic. When you want to be quick, you have to make sure that the car is light and quick.
You'd have to say the relationship between Colin and Jochen was not good. It definitely was not good. Especially when we came to the early days of the 72, which was not a good car to start with. Colin was insisting that Jochen drove the car, and Jochen actually wanted to stick with the Lotus 49. And there was a lot of friction with Jochen telling us he wouldn't drive the car, and then Colin Chapman telling us he will drive the car.
Chapman, he was a very smart speaker. He said he has a car where he can win easily. It was a Dorbahn car, four-wheel drive. He says with one hand he can win every race. And he raised his salary, so he decided to do one more year.
And I think the thing that persuaded him was Bernie. And Bernie was sort of his manager, sort of not, another one of his best mates. And Bernie just said, if you want to live, go to Brabham. But if you really want a chance of winning the championship, go to Lotus or stay there.
We stress everything to the limit on our race cars. We find out just what a part will do and how much it will stand, and then we then know what sort of safety limit we can incorporate in our production cars.
All the drivers knew how light and how quick a Lotus could be. We all would have driven it because we want to win, and he wanted to win, and that's it. So everybody knew when you drive a Lotus, this is the risk you take. It's your decision if you want to do it. I would have driven a Lotus, no question, if I can win a championship.
He wanted to win. He knew the other, Brabham and McLaren, were solid cars, but to win a championship, he had to go to Lotus. Then he had his accident in Monza, which in the end did cost his life.
We had a lot of friends in racing in those days. We traveled together. It was like a sort of family circus. It was great fun.
It was early afternoon qualifying. He put the brakes on for parabolica and the car just speared left. Front brake shaft had just simply snapped. Took the car completely out of his control. Jochen would never ever do up the crutch belts. So when he hit the fence, he torpedoed down into the cockpit. And I think the buckle of the big central buckle of the seatbelt, you know, did very serious damage to him.
After the accident, I went to see what had happened. I run down there, and nobody quite knew what happened, obviously, except he was in bad shape. And they took him to a little sort of Volkswagen bus thing, which was supposed to be an ambulance, which it wasn't. I did travel with him, so I said, I'd go to the hospital. Anyway, on arrival, he was dead.
Jackie went to the track hospital and was appalled to see this flatbed truck alongside the hospital with the body of Rindt on it.
It was a kind of statement of what motor racing was in those days. He wasn't properly dealt with. He I don't think, had the right equipment to keep him alive.
At that time, in Austria, we didn't have a TV recording, so all of a sudden on radio came the message, a big accident from Jochen, and slowly it came through that he was killed.
No doctor with him, no nurse with him, no priest with him, nobody. Just Jochen Rindt and some bits of sort of bushes and whatnot that had come in from another part of the track. He said it was hard to take in. Here was this man about to become the world champion, and he's dead, and nobody's taking any notice.
It was just another terrible part of the career that at that time was reality. And it just wouldn't happen today.
Even though he missed the last 3 races because he was killed at Monza, still it was enough to, you know, to win him the world championship.
We all felt good, and we were happy that he became champion because he was the fastest and the best driver of this season. So it was just correct that he won the title.
The only man ever to become world champion and never know it.
I mean, one of the things a racing driver has to contend with and deal with is fatalities, particularly if that driver is somebody who you're closer to than some of the others. And in the 70s, fatalities were a big part of Formula One. On the Friday, Barrichello had a very nasty accident in the very fast S's just before the pit straight. Luckily got away with minor injuries, but could have been killed.
It was one of those that made you wince. It was bouncing high in the air and end over end and all the rest of it. And in fact, he was hurt, but he wasn't badly hurt.
I've seen him. Yes, I saw him, and he is speaking not very well, but he's speaking.
He hit the wall. I think he just caught the very top of the last maybe row or something, you know, the last one, and then that sort of threw him like this, and it hit the wall, and then the whole side came off it, and then rolled a couple of times, but his head never had anything.
Your impression of the bad accident with Barrichello?
I can't work that way. Let me cool down.
Yeah, no problem. So there's something in your mind now that you think of this accident?
It happens to Alesi, it happens to Leto. They're very good drivers, so I'm the third one, and I hope to be a good driver. So I think it's not a big problem. As long as I'm alive and I'm okay to drive again, the thing that I love most, I'm okay.
All the best wishes for you, Rubens. Thank you very much.
I suppose we'd all gotten maybe not complacent. There hadn't been a fatality in a Grand Prix or a Grand Prix weekend for quite some time. But that weekend in '94 at Imola turned that all around. front wing assembly collapsed and fell under the nose and under the front wheels. He was powerless to control the car, hit the retaining wall on the outside, coming down to Tosa hairpin, and was killed instantly. And we were doing a live commentary at this time, and it's very difficult because you as a broadcaster, you've got to retain control, and you have to go through what can you think, what can you say. It wasn't a good scene, and we were having to commentate on the images that were being sent out via Eurosport.
That was the first fatality at a Grand Prix weekend since '82 with Gilles and then Riccardo Piloti.
I remember seeing him start that qualifying lap, and it was weird. I remember seeing him start that qualifying lap, and I didn't feel good. It was really weird. Immediately the red flags came out, I just knew something was really bad, and I ran, and I watched the monitors, and obviously it wasn't good.
I was out on track at the time, so as I was coming up to the accident, I could see like purple bits on the track, and our car had purple in it, so I knew straight away it was our car. And it wasn't until I turned up at the hairpin, and as I went round the hairpin, I could see him with there was a vehicle, there was a couple people just got to him, but I could see by the position of his neck, it was enough for me to think that he was gone. Yeah.
On the Saturday night, I remember speaking to Professor Watkins, who was in the same hotel, and I wanted to understand more as to why Ratzenberger had lost his life. And in the course of that conversation, he had mentioned that Senna, had been deeply upset by the fatality.
Both our drivers are quite upset. Their spirit isn't in it this afternoon. I fully support that. They're also in good condition on the grid for the race. We've done enough, so we'll support their decision not to go out.
The same at Benetton, the feeling, is the track safety good enough, do you feel?
I'm not qualified to talk about the track.
By now, most of the journalists in the press room had never been at a racetrack where someone had died, and they were fundamentally they were stunned.
The driver's briefing on Sunday morning was really emotional. Ayrton in particular. I'd met Ayrton the night before in the hotel, and he could barely speak. He was really upset about Roland, and it was awful. It was a truly awful day. Everybody was frightened. What's going to happen next?
I had the option to drive or pull out. I sat in the room with Nick, Worth, Bernie and Max, and they said, look, it's your choice. And I thought, what do I do? I've got to do this for the team, to pick them up, to keep this thing going, because you know if you're going to sit there and have a conversation with Roland, he'd be saying, what are you waiting for? Get on with it.
And then, of course, we all know what happened the following day.
We have some problems, but I think we have a good car, and I think we have a good engine too. We just have to work on these problems at this moment, which the team is doing. And for that, we have some modifications here at Imola, hoping to improve part of the difficulties we have found so far.
I wasn't at the race, so I was watching it from home. Already quite a somber feeling because of Roland Ratzenberger's death. It was then an enormous shock as we watched the events unfold during the race itself.
Senna was in the lead and was pacing the field as they went round behind the safety car following the start line accident. And the safety car on this occasion was a ludicrously slow Opel. You look at the speed they were traipsing around the circuit behind this little car, which I'm sure was being driven on the door handles, but it was so pathetically slow that all the Formula One cars were sort of struggling to run at that speed. But of course what happens is the tyres lost temperature running around behind the car, and therefore the pressures as well, and which in effect changes the ride height.
At the restart, when Senna took the lead and Michael Schumacher was running behind him, here was the young pretender trying to dethrone the king of Formula One. And I'd done some things similar in a racing context, when you know you're putting the car you're following under pressure, and you're putting more and more and more pressure on that driver, and he knows you're doing it. And Senna was an intelligent man, he was a highly skilled man, he was a courageous man, a proud man.
There seems no doubt at all that what happened was the car bottomed out, and he, essentially, when that happened, Senna literally had no steering, and all he could do was stand on the brakes, which he did.
My immediate reaction was this is a big one, and then I very rapidly realised that it was a lot more than a big one by the body language and everything else that was coming out. And it was certainly the most difficult commentary job I ever had to do.
I remember standing there, and De Cesaris was in the car, and there was a TV monitor in the garage looking at the accident, and I remember standing there between the monitor and De Cesaris so that he couldn't see. Very sensitive guy, and just trying to protect him, really. But
the telltale to me that this was bad was when Senna was finally extricated from the car and taken to the helicopter. Professor Watkins didn't go with him. I think at that stage I secretly felt that we had lost the most charismatic driver of his era, the best known racing driver in the world, a man of unbinding, bounding qualities and complexities and skill and aspiration, ambition, bravery, courage, did things in a racing car I'd never seen a racing driver ever do in my lifetime. A really unique man amongst a field of very special people.
I think everybody in the circuit and around the world is saddened by the harrowing events of today and this weekend. What are your feelings at this moment?
Certainly no good feelings. I mean, just win a race, but I can't feel satisfied. Can't feel happy. I mean, what happened this weekend, never have seen something like this. Not just one thing, so many things. The only thing I can say about this is I hope we learn from this.
Lots of pressures came to bear, I think, on Ayrton that weekend, and he was determined. He seemed very, very determined to not back off. Or even more so, perhaps, after
Roland's accident, he had an Austrian flag secreted in his oval, so he was planning to win the race and display in honour of Roland should he win the race.
I remember it was Keker Rosberg that he came and he said, "Did you hear the news? What news?" And he said, "Oh, Ayrton died." Wow, I couldn't believe it, yeah.
Yeah, just devastating. You know, the relationship I'd had with Senna. You know, I mean, I've had some brilliant highs in the sport, the highs and the lows. You know, the lows don't get much lower than that. Just a shame, devastating.
I sort of grieved in private. I always grieve in private, whether it's a friend. You know, I don't believe that anyone could possibly think that his loss of losing his life didn't have a big negative impact on me. But I can't see why I have to demonstrate that to anybody.
There was an element, it must have been like when Jim Clark died, of if Jim Clark can die, because he's the best, anybody can die. And that's how it was for us. If Ayrton Senna, you know, can die with all of his skill and speed and talent, then we're all in trouble.
Professor Watkins told me, had the front wheel missed him when he hit the barrier and the front wheel came back into him and hit him on the helmet, had the wheel simply passed him by and not hit him, he said he didn't have a single other injury, not even a broken toe, nothing.
This is a weekend I'd for sure want to forget about. Right from the first moment with Rubens and his accident, and Roland yesterday, Ayrton today, the people in the pit lane. For me, a race you want to forget very quickly.
It was such a tragedy, obviously. From a personal point of view, I just feel very fortunate that I didn't have to be personally involved in the way that I know a lot of my previous colleagues at Williams had to do. So one of my main feelings was to feel for all of those people, particularly Patrick and Frank.
All kinds of theories were put forward, one of which, sadly for the Williams teams, was that the steering had failed. Remember, the steering column had failed, which was absolutely not the case, and was terribly upsetting to all members of the Williams team, not surprisingly.
I didn't have any doubts about doing the race. I was there to do a job, and I had communication with my engineers, and they were saying, we'd like you to, just as a precaution, not to run with the power steering. So I turned the power steering off. They didn't know what had caused this accident. They had data, they had graphs, and they had stuff they were looking back at in the garage, but they didn't actually know what had happened.
I was chief engineer of Benetton. Michael Schumacher was just behind him when he went off. First thing Michael said when he came in was, you know, we discussed it, and I'm sure I know what caused it. I'm 99% sure, and I'm sure that it's difficult to other people to understand how sure I am, because so few people ever spent their lives in a wind tunnel and know how unstable they can be and how bad they are if they're a bit too low.
Your worst fear as an engineer, honestly, and it's not so much in focus these days because the cars are so safe, but it was much more pointy back then, and people forget that. People still got injuries back then, and people died in racing cars. So as an engineer, you know, that was always in the back of your mind. That was your fear, that something that you designed might break and cause some sort of tragedy.
The changes after Imola, the right thing to have done was to say, okay, we are engineers, we are intelligent people, We do not want to suffer unnecessary fatalities or injuries. It's irresponsible to just turn a blind eye to it, so they did something about it. And Max Mosley pushed these changes through, much to everyone's frustration sometimes, but him and Charlie Whiting and Sid Watkins, they were going to get this done.
One thing you remember about Roland was his smile. He had a great smile, and he really enjoyed life. And the fact that he was a Formula One driver made him so happy.
Any surprises for you about Formula One?
No, not really. I think it lived up, or is living up to all the expectations I had. And it's definitely the best series in the world, and it's very good. I think there's not one driver down the pit lane which is a bad driver. I think it's all this year. It looks very competitive from the teams, so it's very professional, and I just love to be here.
I think James Hunt called it, you know, the dark cloud on the horizon of his sunny career. You know, it's the thing you dread, the thing you know is going to come and visit the sport at some point. You tend not to think of anyone else. You tend to think of yourself. You tend to think, well, if I get killed, I won't know anything about it. You don't think, how is that going to affect everyone that knows me and my family? And you tend not to think like that, which is an indictment of all racing drivers, perhaps.